A group of motorcyclists threatens Jimin without realizing he's trained in Taekwondo. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The afternoon sun slowly descended over the vast plains of Korea, casting long golden shadows over the endless road. Jimin adjusted his sunglasses and sank further into the leather seat of his SUV, relishing the solitude of the open road. This journey had been long anticipated. The pressures of his unique life, constant scrutiny, endless demands, and lack of privacy had become overwhelming. Here, far from the chaos of the city and familiar faces, he could think clearly. The landscape was hypnotizing in its simplicity. A vast expanse of rolling hills dotted with small clusters of trees and an occasional windmill creaking in the distance. Jimin had been driving for hours, alternating his playlist between classical compositions and indie rock, reflecting his eclectic taste. He had mapped out a route that avoided highways, opting for the charm of back roads. There was something liberating about being surrounded by nothing but nature and the open sky. However, as the sun sank lower, the desolation of the landscape began to weigh on him. He realized he hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour. The solitude that had initially felt liberating now carried an unsettling edge. He glanced at his phone, which rested on the passenger seat. No signal. Jimin frowned but ignored it. It was all part of the adventure, he reminded himself. The first sign of trouble appeared when he crested a small hill and saw a glint of metal in the distance. A group of motorcycles was parked at the side of the road, their riders milling about. As he approached, they revved their engines in unison, the deep roar of the motorcycles echoing through the quiet landscape. Jimin felt a twinge of fear, but kept driving at a steady speed. However, the motorcyclists didn't stay still. As soon as he passed them, they started their engines, roaring like predators on the hunt. Looking in the rearview mirror, Jimin saw them join the road, closing the distance quickly. At first, he tried to ignore them, telling himself it was nothing, maybe just a group looking for some fun. But the way they maneuvered, surrounding him and blocking his path, told a different story. Two motorcyclists pulled up beside his SUV, their faces partially covered with bandanas. One of them slammed his hand against the car door with a sharp, hollow sound that made Jimin's pulse quicken, though he forced himself to remain calm. Jimin had been in tense situations before, but nothing quite like this. "Keep calm," he murmured to himself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The road ahead stretched out, empty and unforgiving. The sun had almost set, and the sky was painted with crimson and violet hues. He thought about speeding up to outrun them, but the narrowness of the road and the proximity of the motorcycles made it too risky. The motorcyclists weren't just following him, they were testing him, playing with his nerves. Eventually, they forced him to slow down and pull over to the side of the road. His heart raced in his chest, and he had no choice but to stop as the group surrounded his car with their engines idling. Jimin took a deep breath and evaluated his options. His mind worked quickly, and years of martial arts training kicked in instinctively. The leader of the group dismounted from his bike, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached. His leather vest, adorned with patches suggesting a dangerous reputation, and his eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and threat, left Jimin no doubt about his intentions. Jimin cracked the window just enough to hear the man's harsh voice. "Nice car for a place like this," the motorcyclist said with a mocking grin. "What brings you out here, rich kid?" Jimin met his gaze calmly but with caution. "Just passing through," he said in a firm voice, not showing fear. The motorcyclist laughed, a low and threatening sound. "Well, you've got a long road ahead," he said, pointing to the empty road. "Maybe you need some company." The other riders laughed, their voices echoing through the vast, empty landscape. But Jimin didn't join in. He didn't need to. Instead, he slowly opened the door and stepped out of the car, his imposing figure taking the motorcyclist by surprise. He stood firm, scanning the group with a quiet intensity. The leader's laughter died away for a moment, his smile fading. Jimin noticed the brief flicker of doubt in his eyes. Straightening up, Jimin let his years of discipline speak for him. He wasn't looking for trouble, but if he found it, he was ready. The sun had completely set, plunging the landscape into shadows. The tension in the air crackled like static electricity, and Jimin knew the night was about to take a dangerous turn. "What's a city boy like you doing on our road?" the leader asked. Jimin held the leader's gaze, his face calm, but his mind racing. He understood the dynamics unfolding. This was about dominance, testing how much fear they could instill. His finely honed instincts told him to stay calm and avoid escalating the situation. "Just passing through," Jimin responded in a steady voice, keeping his hands relaxed at his sides but ready. He didn't want trouble. The leader let out a harsh laugh, and the others joined in, their laughter grating and mocking. "Problems?" the leader repeated as he leaned closer. "Oh no, you have no idea what real problems are." One of the riders, a slender man with long hair and a deep scar on his cheek, spoke up. "Maybe we should teach him a lesson, huh? Show him how we deal with strangers." The suggestion hung in the air like a dark cloud. Jimin shifted his weight slightly, his eyes scanning the others. There were 6 of them in total, each armed in some way, chains, knives, and the brute strength of men accustomed to violence. They now surrounded him, closing the circle. The leader took another step toward him, his smile widening. "You've got 2 options, kid. Give us your wallet, your keys, and maybe we'll let you walk away." Or, he left the threat hanging, unspoken. Jimin felt his pulse quicken, but he didn't let it show. "I appreciate the offer," he said evenly, "but I'll have to decline." The leader's smile vanished, replaced by a sneer of disdain. "Bad answer." At his signal, one of the motorcyclists lunged at Jimin from behind, trying to grab him, but Jimin was ready. He smoothly spun, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it in a fluid motion. The motorcyclist yelped in pain as Jimin pushed him back, sending him crashing into another member of the group. The quick demonstration of skill took the others by surprise, and for a moment they hesitated. Jimin seized the opportunity to speak, his voice calm but firm. "I don't want trouble, but I'm not an easy target. Let's end this before someone gets hurt." The motorcyclists exchanged uncertain glances, but the leader wasn't willing to back down. His pride was on the line, and he wasn't about to let a stranger humiliate him. He drew a knife, its blade glinting in the dim light. "Looks like you've got some fight in you," he said in a dark tone. "Good. I was hoping you'd make this interesting." The circle tightened again, and Jimin knew there was no way out of this without a fight. His posture subtly shifted, deliberate and calculated, as he prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The motorcyclists didn't know it yet, but they had underestimated him, and they were about to find out just how big a mistake that was. The leader lunged forward, knife in hand, aiming directly for Jimin's abdomen. Time seemed to slow as Jimin's instincts took over. Jimin's instincts took control, and years of martial arts training kicked in. He easily dodged the attack, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted it forcefully. The knife clattered to the ground, its metallic crash echoing ominously in the stillness of the night. The leader staggered back, clutching his wrist and looking at Jimin with a mixture of surprise and fury. "You'll regret that," he growled, his voice dripping with venom. Jimin didn't respond. He stood firm, balancing his weight, and raised his hands, ready for the next move. His posture was calm but authoritative, each movement making it clear that he was not someone they should mess with. Momentarily stunned by Jimin's speed and precision, the motorcyclists began to react. One of them, a bulky man with a chain wrapped around his waist, growled and charged at him. The man swung the chain in a wide arc, aiming for Jimin's head. Jimin ducked just in time, the chain whizzing by his ear. Before the man could recover, Jimin quickly moved forward and delivered a palm strike to his chest, followed by a low sweep that sent him crashing to the ground. The motorcyclist groaned in pain, clutching his ribs as the chain slipped from his hands. The other riders exchanged uneasy glances. Their previously absolute confidence now wavered as they watched Jimin neutralize their comrades with efficiency and precision. "Grab him!" one of them shouted, trying to rally the group. 2 motorcyclists rushed at Jimin simultaneously, one from the left, another from the right. Jimin dropped into a defensive stance, his eyes darting rapidly between the two, ready for whatever came next. The 2 attackers lunged together. The first threw a wild punch, which Jimin easily deflected, responding with a swift elbow to the man's jaw. The second attempted to charge, but Jimin used his momentum against him, redirecting him and throwing him hard onto the ground with a solid thud. The sound of blows, gasps, and groans filled the air as Jimin continued to dodge and overpower his attackers. His movements were fluid and controlled, each punch and counterattack reflecting his discipline and years of training. Despite the numerical disadvantage, he remained serene, his breathing steady, and his focus intact. The leader, still holding his injured wrist, shouted orders to the remaining riders. "What are you waiting for? Take him down!" he roared, his voice thick with frustration and desperation. Another younger and thinner motorcyclist hesitated before stepping forward, brandishing a steel bar that gleamed menacingly in the moonlight. He swung it with all his might, but Jimin was faster. He dodged the attack, grabbed the bar mid-swing, and yanked it away with precision. Using the same bar, he disarmed another motorcyclist who was reaching for his own weapon. The dynamics of the confrontation had shifted entirely. What had started as an attempt to intimidate Jimin had turned into a desperate struggle for the motorcyclists. Their laughter and mockery had disappeared, replaced by clenched teeth and frantic movements. Though Jimin maintained control, he knew he couldn't let his guard down. The motorcyclists had underestimated him at first, but desperation could make them more dangerous quickly. Jimin scanned the scene. 3 motorcyclists were on the ground, groaning in pain, while the remaining 3, including the leader, stood tall but visibly shaken. "We've had enough fun," Jimin said firmly but calmly. "Leave now and no one else gets hurt." For a moment, it seemed like his words might have an effect. The motorcyclists hesitated, their confidence clearly wavering. But the leader, with his pride wounded, took a step forward, his eyes burning with fury. "This isn't over," he spat, signaling for the others to regroup. Jimin's jaw tightened. He knew this wasn't finished. The motorcyclists weren't just trying to win, they wanted to salvage their pride. And Jimin was prepared to show them that neither bravado nor numerical superiority would break his resolve. The remaining motorcyclists quickly reorganized, their movements now more precise, driven by a mixture of anger and humiliation. The leader, still clutching his injured wrist, barked orders like a sergeant. "Surround him! Don't give him space to move!" The group moved as one, forming a loose circle around Jimin. Their earlier arrogance had been replaced with cold determination, the kind of focus that made them even more dangerous. Jimin scanned their positions, calculating distances, angles, and possible escape routes. He knew they were trying to limit his mobility, but he also noticed that in their desperation, they had left gaps in their formation. "Come on, rich boy," one of the motorcyclists sneered, cracking his knuckles. "Let's see what you've got." Jimin didn't answer. He focused on his breathing, keeping it steady while his senses sharpened. Every shift in weight, every look exchanged between the riders gave him valuable information. He knew the key to winning wasn't brute force, but strategy and patience. The first motorcyclist, a bulky man with a chain, charged at him, swinging it wildly toward Jimin's head. Jimin ducked and moved to the side, letting the chain pass harmlessly by. When the man lost his balance, Jimin seized the opportunity, delivering a quick strike to his knee, causing him to fall with a painful grunt. Another motorcyclist saw his chance and attacked from behind with a broken bottle. Jimin smoothly turned, twisted his wrist, and forced the man to drop the bottle with a cry of pain. With a quick shove, Jimin sent him into another motorcyclist, sending them both sprawling to the ground in a tangled mess. The leader watched the scene unfold, his frustration mounting. "Idiots, stop attacking him one by one," he shouted. "Surround him and attack together." Jimin felt the shift immediately. The motorcyclists were no longer acting as individuals. Now they were coordinating their movements, closing the circle like a pack of wolves. He knew the pressure was building, but he also knew that he still had the advantage. This wasn't just a physical fight, it was a battle of wills, and Jimin wasn't about to give in. "I don't need to," Jimin said calmly, his voice firm despite the mounting tension. "I just need to outlast you." The leader's eyes narrowed as he clenched his jaw. With a gesture to his men, he signaled them to flank Jimin on both sides. The motorcyclists obeyed, their movements now more deliberate, but Jimin could see the fatigue in their faces. Their confidence was fading, replaced by frustration and growing doubt. Jimin took a step back, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. The moon hung high in the sky, casting its pale light over the scene. He knew the motorcyclist wouldn't let him go without a final confrontation, but he also knew that the more they pressed him, the more mistakes they would make, and he was ready to exploit every single one of them. When the leader stepped forward, drawing a second knife from his belt, Jimin braced himself for the next phase of the fight. He was no longer just surviving, he was taking control, one calculated move at a time. Jimin disarmed the motorcyclist, making the knife fall and slide across the asphalt before the rider could react. Jimin kicked him in the chest, knocking him out of the fight. The others hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances. Their initial arrogance began to crack under the weight of Jimin's determination and skill. "What's wrong with you guys?" the leader snarled, furious. "He's just one guy." Another, larger and slower motorcyclist, armed with a baseball bat, advanced. He swung it with all his might, aiming for Jimin's ribs. Jimin easily dodged, using the chain to deflect the next blow. The sound of metal clashing echoed in the stillness of the night, and in the brief moment when the motorcyclist lost his balance, Jimin seized the opportunity. He wrapped the chain around the bat and wrenched it from the man's hands. The weapon clattered to the ground as the motorcyclist stumbled forward, and Jimin delivered a spinning kick to his torso, sending him crashing to the ground, gasping for air. The leader watched the scene, his eyes filled with fury and frustration. "Enough of this," he shouted, pulling a second knife from his belt. He stepped forward, moving with measured steps, clearly intent on finishing the fight himself. Jimin adjusted his posture, casually swinging the chain in his hand. The leader was more experienced and calculating than the others, and his movements showed it. He didn't attack recklessly like his subordinates. Instead, he approached with caution, the knife gleaming dangerously in the moonlight. "You're good, I admit that," the leader said in a low, threatening tone. "But you're out of your league." "We'll see about that," Jimin responded firmly, his stance unwavering. The leader lunged forward, slashing with precision. Jimin deflected the attack with the chain, using it to block the blade. The two began to circle each other, their movements fluid and deliberate, like predators fighting for dominance. The other motorcyclists watched in silence, their confidence completely shattered. Jimin feigned a move to the left, luring the leader into a misstep. When the man overextended, Jimin closed the distance, wrapping the chain around his forearm to block the knife and delivering a quick elbow strike to the leader's jaw. The leader staggered but recovered quickly, his knife flashing in a desperate counterattack. The fight became fast and brutal, each move met with a response, every opening exploited. Jimin's training gave him the advantage. His reflexes were sharp, his mind focused. Finally, he saw his chance. The leader's grip on the knife was weakening as exhaustion took over. Jimin attacked with precision, disarming the leader and sending the knife flying into the darkness before the man could react. Jimin used the chain to immobilize the leader's arm, twisting it behind his back and forcing him to his knees. "This is over," Jimin said, his voice calm but firm. "Tell them to stop." The leader looked at him, his face a mixture of rage and reluctant respect. He glanced around at his defeated comrades, their faces marked by exhaustion and defeat. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Lower your weapons," he growled, his voice heavy with resentment. The motorcyclists hesitated, but finally obeyed, stepping back and lowering their weapons. Jimin released the leader and stepped back, still on guard. "You were lucky," the leader spat as he stood up, rubbing his arm. "But don't think this is over." Jimin didn't respond. He simply watched as the motorcyclists retreated, the roar of their engines breaking the stillness of the night. The leader was the last to leave, throwing Jimin one last defiant look before accelerating and disappearing into the road. The moon shone high, illuminating the empty road. Jimin stood still, his breath controlled as the adrenaline faded, leaving him with a calm resolve. He had faced adversity and come out victorious, but he knew the leader's final words weren't an empty threat. With his gaze fixed on the horizon, Jimin exhaled slowly. Whatever came next, he was ready. He pulled a second knife from his boot, its blade gleaming ominously under the moonlight. It was longer with a serrated edge designed both to intimidate and to wound. Jimin held it with the ease of someone who had used it before. His movements were fluid and confident as his muscles tensed. He could tell the difference in the leader's posture. This was no street fighter, but a man with real combat experience. The cocky bravado from earlier had vanished. replaced by a deadly focus. Jimin knew this fight would be different. The leader moved first, his deliberate steps closing the distance between them. He launched a precise slash, testing Jimin's reflexes. Jimin dodged the first strike, the blade cutting the air only inches from his torso. He countered with a quick strike to the man's shoulder, but the leader spun out of range. They moved in circles like predators, their steps slow and calculated. The road seemed to shrink, the vast expanse of the plains fading into the background as the two men faced off. "You've got some moves, I'll give you that," the leader said, his voice filled with grudging respect. "But let's see how long you can last." The leader lunged again, faster this time, forcing Jimin to retreat. Jimin deflected the knife with its forearm, the blade grazing at his sleeve but not harming him. He countered with a lateral kick aimed at the man's ribs, but the leader dodged, launching his own rapid, calculated attack. The fight intensified, their blows and counterattacks becoming faster and more forceful. The leader was relentless, combining speed and strength in his attacks, but Jimin's training kept him a step ahead. He used the chain still in his hand to block and deflect, the metallic clink marking the rhythm of their movements. The leader's frustration grew with each failed strike, and he pushed harder, the knife a blur as he tried to break through Jimin's defenses. Jimin remained patient, waiting for the opportunity he knew would come. Finally, the leader overreached, his knife cutting through empty air when Jimin dodged. In that moment, Jimin acted. He wrapped the chain around the leader's wrist, twisting it with force and forcing him to release the knife. The weapon clattered to the ground with a metallic crash. Before the leader could react, Jimin delivered a sharp elbow strike to his temple. The leader staggered but didn't fall, his eyes burning with fury as he lunged at Jimin with wild, desperate movements. Jimin dodged and countered with a series of precise strikes, targeting the leader's weak points. A blow to the solar plexus left the leader breathless, and a sweeping kick sent him crashing to the ground. The leader lay on the asphalt, breathing heavily, his pride as wounded as his body. His gaze was a mixture of anger and reluctant respect. "You've got guts," the leader admitted, his voice hoarse. "I'll give you that." "This is over," Jimin said firmly. "Stay down." For a moment, it seemed like the leader might try to attack again, but the fight had drained him. He slowly sat up, his expression dark. "You've made an enemy at night," he warned, his tone low and threatening. "This isn't over." Jimin didn't respond. He took a step back, keeping his eyes on the man as he struggled to rise. The leader picked up his knife, but made no move to attack. Instead, he turned toward his motorcycle, his movements stiff and deliberate, before mounting it and speeding off into the night. Jimin turned on the engine, the roar breaking the silence of the night. "We'll meet again," the leader's voice barely audible over the noise. Then he accelerated, disappearing into the darkness. The silence returned, heavy and deep. Jimin remained still for a moment, his body sore but his mind alert. He had won the fight, but the leader's final words still echoed in his mind. He knew this was far from over. As he picked up the keys to his SUV and climbed back into the driver's seat, Jimin allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The fight had tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated, forcing him to rely on every ounce of skill and determination. But he had prevailed. He started the engine again, driving into the night with a renewed sense of confidence. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on, just as he had that night. Jimin sat in his SUV, gripping the wheel tightly, while the events of the night replayed in his mind. The empty stretch of road ahead of him felt eerily silent. The vast plains of Korea now seemed enveloped in oppressive stillness. His muscles ached, and his knuckles bore the faint bruises from the brutal fight, but his mind was sharper than ever. The leader's last words echoed in his ears. "This isn't over." Jimin exhaled slowly, steadying his breath, and glanced in the rearview mirror. There were no signs of the motorcyclists, but the unease still lingered in his chest. His instincts told him they weren't the type of men to leave a defeat unanswered. The encounter had been a blow to their pride, and men like that valued reputation above all. The engine of Jimin's SUV roared to life once more as he rejoined the road. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the asphalt was the only sound breaking the silence. He kept a steady speed, but his eyes flicked between the road ahead and the mirrors, searching for any sign of pursuit. The moon shone high in the sky, its pale light casting long shadows over the desolate landscape as he drove. The sense of isolation grew heavier. There were no streetlights, no passing cars, just an endless stretch of road bordered by dark, featureless terrain. It felt as though the world had shrunk, leaving him alone in a vast, empty expanse. However, Jimin wasn't truly alone. Though the motorcyclists had retreated, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were still watching, lurking just out of sight. The leader's gaze had been more than anger. It had been a promise. In the distance, a faint glow appeared on the horizon. As Jimin drew closer, he realized it was a small roadside restaurant, its neon sign flickering weakly in the darkness. The sight was a relief, a sign of civilization in the middle of nowhere. He decided to stop, not only to regroup, but to assess his next move. The crunch of gravel under the tires marked his arrival in the parking lot. The restaurant was a modest structure, its windows glowing warmly against the cold night. There were only a few vehicles parked outside, a rusty pickup truck, an old sedan, and a shiny cargo truck with a trailer. Jimin stepped out of his SUV, his tall figure cutting through the dim light, each movement deliberate as he scanned the area. Satisfied that there was no immediate threat, he walked inside. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered. The restaurant was nearly empty, save for an older trucker sipping coffee at the counter and an elderly couple sitting at a table near the window. The air smelled of fried bacon and stale coffee, a comforting contrast to the tension outside. Jimin sat at the counter, nodding politely to the trucker, who gave him a curious look. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with a can-yet-weary face, approached with a notepad in hand. "What can I get you, hun?" she asked in a friendly tone. "Just coffee, please," Jimin replied, his voice calm but firm as she poured his drink. The trucker leaned in slightly, unable to contain his curiosity. "Looks like you've had a rough night," he said in a gravelly voice. Jimin glanced at him briefly, noting his rugged face and sharp eyes. "Something like that," he replied, keeping his answer vague. The trucker chuckled briefly before growing serious. "Let me guess," he said. "You ran into those motorcycle guys, right?" Jimin squinted slightly. "You've seen them?" he asked, setting his cup down on the counter. "I've heard of them," the trucker replied. "They like to hang around these roads, looking for trouble with anyone who doesn't fit in. Always lurking." Jimin nodded, his suspicions confirmed. "They're persistent," he added, glancing at the trucker. "Here's some advice," the trucker said, leaning in closer. "They don't like being humiliated. If you embarrass them, they'll come back. They don't know how to let things go." Jimin appreciated the warning, though it was nothing he hadn't already considered. "Thanks," he said simply, taking a sip of his coffee. The trucker looked at him with some respect. "You defended yourself, huh? You don't seem like the type to be intimidated." Jimin gave a small smile. Didn't have much choice. It might have been his imagination, but the sound of engines grew louder, sending a chill down his spine. Motorcycles. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror, and sure enough, small points of light appeared on the horizon. The roar of the engines intensified, a menacing growl he knew too well. Jimin's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had anticipated this. The lights grew brighter, spreading out like the eyes of a predator in the darkness. The motorcyclists had found him, and this time they weren't playing. He pressed the accelerator, sending the SUV surging forward while calculating his options. The road stretched endlessly ahead of him, with no signs of civilization in sight. Running wasn't an option, not on a road like this, where the speed and maneuverability of the bikes gave them an advantage. He needed a plan, something that would give him the upper hand. The motorcyclists closed in, their headlights illuminating the path behind him. Jimin counted at least 6 of them, their engines growling like a pack of wolves, tightening the circle around him. His jaw clenched as his mind raced. They weren't going to let him go. They wanted to finish what they started. As they approached, they began to spread out, adjusting their formation strategically. One positioned himself alongside Jimin's SUV, pounding on the passenger window with his fist. Another sped up behind him, dangerously close to his rear bumper. They were cornering him, trying to force him off the road. Jimin stayed focused, his hands steady on the wheel, his mind running through everything he had learned in his years of training. Control your breathing, stay calm, think ahead. He scanned the surrounding terrain, looking for anything that could give him an advantage. Up ahead, he spotted a sharp curve in the road, flanked by steep embankments and rocky outcrops. It was risky, but it might be his only chance. He gripped the wheel tighter, preparing. As he neared the curve, he tapped the brakes lightly, causing the motorcyclist to close in even more, confident they had him trapped. But the moment he reached the curve, Jimin jerked the wheel hard, sending the SUV sliding toward the edge of the embankment. The sudden move caught the motorcyclist by surprise, forcing them to swerve wildly to avoid a collision. One of them lost control, his bike skidding and crashing into the gravel. Jimin expertly corrected the slide, stabilizing the SUV as he sped out of the curve. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the fallen motorcyclist being helped by the others, their formation broken and their pursuit slowing down. The leader's roar echoed through the night, and the sound of his engine rumbled louder as he drew closer, his figure unmistakable in the glow of the headlights. Jimin could feel the man's determination and fury as he closed the gap again. The chase was far from over, but Jimin knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to give up without a fight. In the distance, a faint light appeared on the horizon. As Jimin got closer, he realized it was another roadside restaurant. Its neon sign flickered weakly in the dark, a beacon of civilization in the vast emptiness. This place seemed more crowded, with several large cargo trucks parked outside. Jimin felt a surge of hope, witnesses, potential allies. The motorcyclist didn't seem to notice or care about the restaurant. Jimin swerved into the gravel parking lot, slowing just enough to keep control as the wheels kicked up dust while he maneuvered between the trucks. He parked near the entrance and quickly got out of the SUV, his tall figure catching the immediate attention of the restaurant's patrons through the large windows. He walked with purpose, but calm, his composed posture belying the chaos behind him. The bell above the door jingled loudly when he entered, and the low murmur of conversation in the room stopped abruptly. The space was filled with a mix of truckers, travelers, and locals, all with a mixture of curiosity and concern on their faces. As they turned to look at him, Jimin scanned the room quickly. Behind the counter stood a stocky man in his 40s, probably the owner, arms crossed and eyes suspicious. One of the truckers, a gray-bearded man with a hardened expression, slowly stood up, adjusting his cap. "Those guys again," he muttered. "They've been terrorizing this road for years." Another trucker nodded, clenching his jaw. "They don't like losing. If they're following you, it's because you embarrassed them." The roar of the motorcycles grew louder, and the tension in the restaurant increased. The motorcyclists had arrived, their headlights cutting through the dust and illuminating the front windows. "They won't come in quietly," Jimin said, looking at the truckers. "I'll handle them, but if anyone else gets involved, it could escalate." The owner of the restaurant shook his head firmly. "Not in my place," he said. "This is neutral ground. If they come looking for trouble, we'll handle it together." Jimin nodded, appreciating the man's determination. Just then, the door burst open with a loud jingle as the leader of the motorcyclists walked in, his face a mixture of fury and arrogant confidence. "You've got guts coming here," he sneered. Jimin stood his ground, his expression serene yet unyielding. "I didn't run. I chose this place for our next confrontation." What Jimin hadn't anticipated was a battle that would test every ounce of his strength and determination. He slid back into his SUV, the cold leather seat against his back as he adjusted the rearview mirror. His own reflection stared back at him, eyes sharper, jaw clenched, with a newly discovered resolve. He had faced danger head-on, proving not just to others, but to himself, that he could stand firm. The engine roared to life as he pulled back onto the road. The open path stretched endlessly before him. The first rays of the sun illuminated the pavement, and Jimin felt a sense of renewal. He was no longer the same person who had started this journey. The fights, the pursuit, the tense moments of survival had strengthened him, revealing a depth of strength he hadn't fully realized before. The memory of the motorcyclist still weighed on him, and the leader's final words hung in his mind like a promise, not an empty threat. Men like that didn't forget slights, especially when their pride was at stake. Jimin knew they might come after him again, whether that night, the next week, or further down the road. But instead of fear, he felt a calm resolution. He had faced them and beaten them once, and he was ready to do it again, if necessary. As the kilometers passed, his thoughts drifted to the people he had met, the truckers at the restaurant, the seasoned owner who had kept his cool in the face of danger. It reminded him that even in the most desolate places, there was strength and solidarity. It wasn't just his martial arts training that had sustained him that night. It was the lesson that resilience wasn't always a solitary effort. A sign ahead caught his attention, a small rest area at the side of the road. Jimin decided to stop, wanting to stretch his legs and let the fresh air clear his mind. The place was simple, with a couple of picnic tables under an old oak tree and a vending machine humming in the corner. He parked the SUV and stepped out, the crunch of gravel under his boots anchoring him in the present. The plains stretched out in all directions, vast and unrelenting. Jimin stood there for a moment, absorbing the landscape. This land was harsh, challenging, but also beautiful in its simplicity. It reminded him of the challenges he had faced, raw, unforgiving, but ultimately conquerable. He pulled a bottle of water from the SUV and took a long drink, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun was higher now, its heat spreading across the land. A sense of calm washed over him, a quiet realization that he had been through the fire and come out stronger. As he prepared to get back on the road, a sound caught his attention, the distant roar of engines. His hand instinctively tightened around the bottle, but as the noise grew, he realized it wasn't the familiar growl of motorcycles. It was a convoy of trucks, their trailers shining under the sun. The lead truck had slowed as it passed, and Jimin recognized the driver. It was the gray-bearded trucker from the restaurant. The man gave him a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared experience, before continuing on his way. Jimin watched as the convoy disappeared into the distance, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the threats from the previous night still lingered like shadows at the edge of his mind. But Jimin didn't feel fear, only resolve. The open road called to him, a symbol of freedom and possibilities. He returned to his SUV, adjusted the rearview mirror once more, and fixed his gaze on the horizon. The journey wasn't over, but he was ready for whatever came next, with a steady hand on the wheel and calm determination in his heart. Jimin moved forward toward the light of a new day,